The sun beat down mercilessly on the plains of Wyoming Territory in 1874, but the heat outside couldn't touch the cold despair that had settled deep in Lillian Taylor's bones. 3 weeks in the dank, Cellar had taught her that hope was a foolish thing to cling to, especially when her own uncle had locked her away for her own good. Lillian pressed her dirt-smudged face against the small basement window, the only connection to the world beyond her prison. It was barely large enough to let in a sliver of light, certainly not wide enough for escape. She watched dust motes dance in the beam of sunlight that penetrated the gloom, highlighting the cobwebs in the corners and the crude plank bed where she slept. "Willfulness is a sin, Lillian," Uncle Jeremiah had lectured when he dragged her down here after she'd refused yet another suitor, a man 3 times her age who smelled of whiskey and made her skin crawl with his leering gaze. "You'll stay down here until you learn your place. A woman needs a husband, and you'll take whoever I choose." A creak from above pulled Lillian from her thoughts. She scrambled back from the window, heart racing. Was it time for her daily meal already? The cellar door swung open with its familiar groan, but instead of Uncle Jeremiah's heavy tread on the wooden stairs, she heard nothing. "Miss, you down there?" The voice was unfamiliar, deep, hesitant, definitely not her uncle. Lillian retreated to the corner, wary. "Who's there?" A man appeared at the bottom of the stairs, silhouetted against the light from above. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weather-beaten hat that he removed as he spotted her. "Name's Henry Ross, madam. I work at the Taylor Ranch, just got hired on last week." "My uncle will be furious if he finds you here," Lillian whispered, even as hope sparked dangerously in her chest. Henry stepped closer, and she could see him better now, perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes that seemed to hold genuine concern. "Your uncle ain't coming back anytime soon, miss. He's laid up at Doc Miller's with a broken leg. Horse threw him this morning. He isn't dead." The question slipped out before Lillian could stop it, and she felt a flush of shame at the disappointment in her voice. Henry's expression shifted subtly. "No, madam, but I reckon a man who locks a woman in a cellar might deserve worse than a broken leg." He moved to the crude lock that secured her prison from the outside. "I heard him shouting about needing to get back to teach that girl obedience." When I asked who he meant, the other hands just looked away. "Took me half the day to figure out where you might be." With a decisive motion, Henry brought a metal tool to the lock. A few twists, and the mechanism broke with a satisfying snap. He swung the door wide open and extended his hand. "No more of this. No woman deserves to be treated like an animal." Lillian stared at his outstretched hand, afraid to believe this wasn't some cruel trick. I can't leave. Where would I go? He's my only family." "First things first, miss. Let's get you out of this hole, get you some decent food and clean water, then we can figure the rest out." Henry's voice was gentle but firm. "I don't know what he told you to keep you obedient, but I know right from wrong, and this here," he gestured at the cellar, "this is wrong." Trembling, Lillian placed her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was careful, as if she might shatter. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the first step toward freedom. Neither of them could have known that this moment a lock broken, a hand extended in kindness, would forever alter the course of their lives in the unforgiving landscape of the American West. The world outside the cellar was blindingly bright after days in the dim light. Lillian squinted against the sunshine, her legs wobbly as a newborn colt's. The ranch house stood silent, a modest 2-story structure that had been her prison even before the cellar. Uncle Jeremiah had taken her in after her parents died of fever 5 years ago, when she was just 18. What had started as strict supervision had gradually morphed into virtual imprisonment as she resisted his attempts to marry her off. "Easy now," Henry murmured, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. "Take your time." Lillian nodded, embarrassed by her weakness. "I need to gather my things," she said, straightening her spine with determination. "If I'm leaving, I won't go empty-handed," Henry nodded. "I'll keep watch. Your uncle's got 2 ranch hands still loyal to him who rode into town, but they could be back anytime." Inside the house, Lillian moved with purposeful haste. She changed out of her filthy dress into a simple blue calico, splashed water on her face, and twisted her long brown hair into a practical braid. From beneath her mattress, she retrieved a small pouch containing the gold locket her mother had given her and the few coins she'd managed to save. She added a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, and a small daguerreotype of her parents to a carpet bag. When she emerged onto the porch, Henry was scanning the horizon, one hand resting on his holstered revolver. He glanced her way, and something in his expression shifted. "You clean up real nice, Miss Taylor," he said, then immediately looked abashed. "Pardon my forwardness." "It's Lillian," she corrected, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. "And thank you for the compliment, Mr. Ross. I feel human again." "Henry," he replied with a small nod. "Just Henry is fine." A cloud of dust on the road leading to the ranch caught their attention. "Riders approaching." "That'll be Silas and Deke," Henry said grimly. "We'd best be going. You ready to ride?" Lillian eyed the saddled horses tethered nearby. "I haven't ridden in months. Uncle said it wasn't proper for a lady to straddle a horse." Henry's jaw tightened. "Your uncle seems to have a lot of ideas about what's proper that don't make much sense." He led her to a gentle-looking mare. "This is Marigold. She's sweet-tempered. You'll do fine." With his help, Lillian mounted, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. The sensation of being astride a horse again brought a rush of memories, riding across open meadows with her father, the wind in her hair, the feeling of freedom. "Where are we going?" she asked as Henry swung into his own saddle with practiced ease. "I've got a friend who runs a way station about 10 miles east of here. Emma Winters. She's a widow who takes no nonsense from anyone. You'll be safe there while we figure out what's next." They set off at a steady trot, angling away from the approaching riders and toward a copse of cottonwoods that would provide cover. Lillian found her rhythm quickly, muscle memory taking over despite her months of inactivity. "You ride well," Henry observed, glancing her way. "Like you were born to it. My father believed daughters should be as capable as sons," she explained, feeling a pang of grief for the man who had taught her so much. "He let me help with the cattle drives every summer until I was 16. Henry raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "That explains it then. Most ladies I've met can barely stay on a side saddle." They rode in companionable silence for a while, putting distance between themselves and the ranch. Lillian found herself studying her rescuer when he wasn't looking. There was a quietness to Henry Ross, a steady confidence that didn't demand attention. His clothes were worn but clean, his movements economical and sure. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle. "Why did you help me?" She finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd appeared at the cellar door. Henry was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I had a sister once, Caroline. Pa was hard on her, too hard. One day she ran off with a traveling salesman to escape him." His eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "They found her body 3 months later. The salesman was long gone." He turned to meet Lillian's gaze. "I promised myself I'd never stand by again if I saw someone being mistreated. Especially not a woman." The weight of his words settled between them. "I'm sorry about your sister," Lillian said softly. "It was a long time ago." Henry adjusted his hat. "But thank you." The sun was beginning its westward descent when they reached the way station. It was a sturdy log structure with a barn and corral, situated near a creek that provided water for travelers and their animals. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the smell of baking bread wafted through the air. A woman emerged from the main building, stout, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical dress and a no-nonsense expression that softened when she spotted Henry. "Well, look what the wind blew in," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Henry Ross, it's been too long." Her gaze shifted to Lillian, taking in her travel-worn appearance with shrewd assessment. "Emma," Henry greeted her, dismounting and helping Lillian down from her horse. "This here is Miss Lillian Taylor. She needs a safe place to stay for a spell." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "Taylor, any relation to Jeremiah Taylor? He's my uncle," Lillian admitted, chin lifting despite her apprehension. Emma studied her for a moment longer, then nodded decisively. Well, any enemy of Jeremiah Taylor is a friend of mine. That man's been trying to buy my property for years. She gestured toward the house. Come on in, you look like you could use a hot meal and a bath. Lillian nearly wept at the kindness in the older woman's voice. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Emma, the woman corrected. We don't stand on ceremony here. Inside, the way station was simple but clean, with a large common room where travelers could take meals and a few private rooms for overnight stays. Emma led Lillian to a small bedroom at the back of the house. You can wash up here, she said, pointing to a basin and pitcher. I'll have a proper bath drawn for you later. For now, rest a bit. Supper's in an hour. Left alone, Lillian sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She was free at least for now. But what would happen when Uncle Jeremiah recovered? He wasn't a man to let go of what he considered his property easily, and in his mind, Lillian was exactly that property to be traded for advantageous connections. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Henry stood in the doorway, hat in hand. I need to head into town, he said. See what's being said about your disappearance, get a feel for what your uncle might do next. You're coming back. Lillian couldn't keep the anxiety from her voice. Henry's expression softened. I'll be back by morning. Emma will look after you. She's handy with a shotgun and not afraid to use it. Lillian nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course, please be careful. Always, Em. He hesitated, then added, Lillian, I want you to know I meant what I said. No more Cellars. No more men telling you what to do. You deserve better. With that, he was gone, leaving Lillian with a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. True to Emma's word, supper was a hearty affair: venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie still warm from the oven. Two travelers passing through joined them at the long table, but Emma introduced Lillian simply as her niece visiting from Denver, and neither man questioned the story. After the meal, Emma showed Lillian to a copper tub filled with steaming water, screened off in a corner of the kitchen for privacy. Take your time, Emma urged, handing her a bar of lavender-scented soap. Nothing heals the spirit like washing away the dirt. The bath was heavenly. Lillian scrubbed away the grime of the cellar, watching the water turn gray with the evidence of her ordeal. As she washed, she allowed herself to truly feel everything she'd been suppressing: the anger at her uncle's betrayal, the fear of what might come next, and beneath it all, a tentative hope that perhaps, just perhaps, life could be different now. Later, dressed in a clean nightgown Emma had loaned her, Lillian sat by the fire while the older woman brushed out her long hair. You want to tell me what happened? Emma asked quietly. Henry didn't say much, but I can guess it wasn't pleasant. Haltingly at first, then with growing conviction, Lillian shared her story: her parents' death, her uncle's increasing control, his determination to marry her off to men who would benefit him financially, and finally, her imprisonment in the cellar after refusing yet another unsuitable match. Emma listened without interruption, her hands steady as they worked through the tangles in Lillian's hair. When the tale was finished, she set the brush down and moved to sit across from the younger woman. Your uncle is a worm, she stated flatly, but a dangerous one. He's got influence in this territory, money, connections. He won't let you go easily. I know, Lillian whispered, but I can't go back. I'd rather die than live like that again. Emma's weathered face creased in a determined smile. Then we'll make sure you don't have to. There are options, girl. Always are if you're willing to work for them. What kind of options? Well, for starters, I could use help around here. The way station keeps me busy, especially now that the railroad's bringing more settlers through. Pays not much, but you'd have a roof and meals. Lillian's eyes widened. You'd employ me, but you hardly know me. I know enough. Emma's gaze was direct. I know you've got spirit to have survived what you did without breaking, and I know Henry Ross wouldn't have risked his neck for you if he didn't see something worth saving. She patted Lillian's hand. Think on it. No need to decide tonight. Sleep came easily in the soft bed, the safest Lillian had felt in years. But her dreams were troubled: Uncle Jeremiah looming over her, the cellar door slamming shut, darkness closing in. She woke with a start as dawn was breaking, momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drew her to the kitchen, where Emma was already at work preparing breakfast for her overnight guests. "There's coffee in the pot," Emma said by way of greeting. "You sleep all right, better than I have in months," Lillian replied, helping herself to a cup. "Can I assist you with breakfast?" Emma nodded approvingly. "You can scramble those eggs. 6 travelers came in late last night, plus us makes 8 to feed." They worked side by side, Lillian finding unexpected pleasure in the simple domestic tasks that had once been her daily routine before Uncle Jeremiah had decided she was too valuable to waste on household chores. By the time the travelers began filing in for breakfast, she felt almost normal again. The meal was half over when the sound of hoofbeats outside drew everyone's attention. Emma moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "It's Henry," she announced, visibly relieved. Lillian's heart quickened as she heard his footsteps on the porch. He appeared in the doorway, looking tired but alert, his eyes immediately finding hers across the room. "Morning, all," he greeted, removing his hat as he entered. The other travelers nodded or mumbled responses before returning to their meals. "Come get some breakfast," Emma ordered, already filling a plate. "You look like you rode all night." "Near enough," Henry admitted, accepting the food gratefully. He took a seat beside Lillian, his voice lowering. "We need to talk after this." "Your uncle's not taking your disappearance lying down, broken leg or no." Lillian's appetite vanished. "What has he done?" "Eat first," Emma interjected firmly. "Bad news keeps." Once the travelers had departed and the breakfast dishes were cleared, Emma, Henry, and Lillian gathered around the kitchen table. Henry's expression was grave as he reported what he'd learned in town. "Jeremiah's offering a $100 reward for information on your whereabouts. He's claiming you're mentally unsound and need to be returned for your own safety." Henry's lip curled in disgust. "He's got the sheriff in his pocket, so there's a warrant out for my arrest on charges of kidnapping," Lillian gasped. "That's absurd. You saved me." "Doesn't matter. Your uncle's word carries weight, and people are inclined to believe a respected rancher over a drifting cowboy with no roots in the community." Emma snorted. "Respected my foot. The man's a snake. But Henry's right, Jeremiah's got half the county officials in his debt one way or another." "So what do we do?" Lillian asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I won't go back to him, and I won't let you be arrested for helping me." Henry's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "I've been giving that some thought on the ride back. There's a place about 100 miles north of here, a new settlement called Prospect. Friend of mine settled there last year, said they're looking for folks willing to put down roots. It's far enough from your uncle's influence that you might have a chance at a fresh start." 100 miles is a long way, Emma mused, especially with people looking for you both. "It's not without risk," Henry acknowledged, "but staying here is riskier. It's only a matter of time before someone recognizes Lillian or word gets back to Jeremiah that I've been seen at the way station." Lillian's mind raced. Prospect. Even the name sounded full of promise. But it was so far and the journey would be dangerous. And what then? How would she support herself in a strange town? As if reading her thoughts, Henry continued, "My friend Lucas owns the general store there. He mentioned needing help, said most folks who come through are looking to mine or ranch, not tend a store. You seem like you've got a good head on your shoulders. Could be an opportunity." "And what about you?" Lillian asked quietly. "You'd be leaving everything behind because of me." Something flickered across Henry's face, a mixture of emotions too complex to name. "I'm a cowboy, Miss Lillian. Don't have much to leave behind. Been thinking about settling somewhere anyway." He shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant. "Prospect's as good a place as any." Emma looked between them, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Well, if you're set on this fool plan, you'll need supplies, and you can't travel as an unmarried man and woman without raising eyebrows." "We could say I'm his sister," Lillian suggested. Henry and Emma exchanged glances. "Might work," Emma allowed, "though you don't look much alike." "Half-siblings," Henry proposed. "Same pa, different mothers, explains the different last names too." Lillian nodded, relieved at the simple solution. "When should we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light," Henry decided. "Tonight, we'll plan our route and gather supplies." The longer we stay in one place, the more dangerous it gets. As Emma and Henry began discussing the practicalities, food, weapons, the best trails to avoid detection, Lillian sat quietly, the reality of her situation sinking in. Yesterday, she had been a prisoner with no hope of escape. Today, she was planning a journey that could lead to a new life, a fresh start, all because one man had decided to break a lock and say, "No more." She studied Henry as he leaned over a crude map Emma had sketched, his profile strong in the morning light. What kind of man risked everything for a stranger? And what would happen when they reached Prospect? Would he simply deliver her safely and ride on, his conscience clear? The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. For now, though, there were preparations to make and dangers to face. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Today, Lillian was simply grateful to be free. The pre-dawn air was crisp with early autumn chill as Lillian secured the last of her meager possessions to the saddle. Emma had been generous, providing food, a bedroll, a warm coat, and a small revolver that now sat heavy in the pocket of Lillian's riding skirt. Every woman should know how to protect herself, Emma had insisted the night before, showing Lillian how to load and fire the weapon. Especially out here. Henry emerged from the barn leading his bay gelding, already tacked and loaded. He'd spent much of the previous day making preparations, studying maps, selecting the most secluded trails, ensuring their horses were well shod for the journey ahead. "Ready?" he asked, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air. Lillian nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "As I'll ever be." Emma appeared on the porch, arms folded against the morning chill. "You two be careful now, stick to the plan, no unnecessary risks." "Yes, madam," Henry said with a small smile. "Thank you for everything." Emma waved away his thanks. "Just get this girl somewhere safe, Henry Ross. That's all the thanks I need." She turned to Lillian, her expression softening. "You remember what I told you about the signal mirrors? If we're separated, find high ground, use the mirror to catch the sun, and flash 3 times in the direction we're heading," Lillian recited. "Good girl." Emma surprised her with a quick, fierce hug. "You've got more strength in you than you know, remember that." With final goodbyes exchanged, they mounted up and set off, heading northwest toward the foothills. The plan was to avoid main trails and settlements for the first few days when the search would be most intense. Henry estimated the journey would take about 10 days if all went well. They rode in silence until the way station disappeared from view. Only then did Lillian allow herself a backward glance, feeling a twinge of regret at leaving Emma. In just 2 days, the older woman had shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. "She'll be all right," Henry said, correctly interpreting her expression. "Emma Winters has outlasted outlaws, harsh winters, and 2 husbands. Your uncle doesn't stand a chance against her." That drew a smile from Lillian. "I believe you're right." She straightened in the saddle, facing forward again. "Tell me about Prospect. What's it like?" As they rode, Henry described the settlement, a growing community nestled in a fertile valley, with a main street lined with newly constructed wooden buildings, surrounding farms and ranches, and nearby hills rumored to contain silver deposits. "It's rough around the edges still," he admitted. "But the people there are building something. There's a sense of possibility." "It sounds wonderful," Lillian said wistfully. After years of confinement, the idea of a place built on possibility was intoxicating. They made good progress that first day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of bread and dried beef. By dusk, they had reached the foothills Henry had been aiming for, finding a sheltered spot to make camp near a small stream. "We'll build only a small fire," Henry explained as he gathered sticks. "Just enough to heat some coffee and cook a quick meal. Can't risk a larger blaze being spotted." Lillian set about unrolling their bedding while Henry tended to the horses. The routine of making camp came back to her easily memories of camping with her father during cattle drives, providing guidance. By the time Henry returned, she had a neat campsite arranged and was working on starting the fire with flint and steel. "You've done this before," he observed, watching her coax a small flame from the tinder. My father believed in practical education, she replied, carefully adding small sticks to the growing flame. He said book learning was fine, but knowing how to survive in the wilderness was just as important. Sounds like a wise man. He was. Lillian sat back on her heels, watching the fire strengthen. I think that's why Uncle Jeremiah's treatment hurt so much after growing up with so much freedom being treated like property was. She trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe the suffocation she had felt. Henry settled beside her, close but not touching. Some men can't stand seeing a woman with a mind of her own, makes them feel small somehow. He prodded the fire with a stick. Your father had the right idea. A woman out here needs to be capable. They prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, with coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, as Henry joked. As night fully descended, the fire's glow created a small circle of warmth against the vast darkness surrounding them. Stars emerged overhead in dazzling profusion, more than Lillian had ever noticed from the ranch house. It's beautiful, she murmured, gazing upward. Worth the discomfort of sleeping on the ground, isn't it? Henry smiled, following her gaze. Used to drive cattle on the northern trails. On clear nights like this, sometimes felt like I could reach up and touch those stars. They fell into companionable silence, the crackling of the fire and occasional night sounds of the wilderness the only interruption. Lillian found herself studying Henry's profile in the firelight, the strong lines of his face softened by the golden glow. There was a quiet dignity about him that drew her, a fundamental decency that had compelled him to help a stranger at risk to himself. Why did you really help me, Henry? She asked softly, the question slipping out before she could reconsider. I know you mentioned your sister, but you could have simply reported what was happening. You didn't have to involve yourself so completely. Henry was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, introspective. I've spent most of my life drifting, moving from ranch to ranch, never staying longer than a season or two, telling myself I was free. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. But there comes a point when a man has to decide what kind of person he wants to be. When I heard about you locked away like that, he shook his head. I couldn't ride away, not this time. Even knowing what it might cost you, his eyes met hers across the fire, steady and certain. Some things are worth the cost, Lillian. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of the bond forming through shared danger and purpose. Lillian felt her cheeks warm, and she looked away first, suddenly aware of how alone they were under the vast sky. We should get some rest, Henry said after a moment, his tone deliberately lighter. Long day of riding tomorrow. They banked the fire and retired to their respective bedrolls, positioned on opposite sides of the glowing embers. Despite her exhaustion, Lillian found sleep elusive, her mind filled with the day's events and the uncertainty that lay ahead. And beneath it all, a new awareness of the man sleeping just a few feet away, a man who had risked everything to give her a chance at freedom. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were not of dark cellars and locked doors, but of open skies and endless possibilities. The next 7 days fell into a rhythm, riding from dawn until dusk, making camp in secluded locations, sharing quiet conversations by small fires before retiring to their separate bedrolls. They encountered few travelers, deliberately avoiding the main trails, and the ones they did meet accepted without question their story of half-siblings traveling to join family in Montana. On the 8th day, as they picked their way through a narrow mountain pass, Henry suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. Lillian reined in her mare, instantly alert. Riders, he said quietly, pointing to dust rising in the distance behind them, moving fast. Lillian's heart raced. Do you think it's Uncle Jeremiah's men? Can't tell from here, but we shouldn't wait to find out. Henry scanned their surroundings, quickly assessing options. There's a box canyon about a mile ahead. It's not on any maps I've seen. We can hide there, let them pass by. They urged their horses to a faster pace, careful not to leave an obvious trail. The canyon entrance was nearly invisible, a narrow split in the rock face that widened into a sheltered space with steep walls, a small stream, and enough grass for the horses to graze. Once inside, Henry led them to the far end where a tumble of boulders provided additional cover. "We'll wait here until nightfall," he decided. "If it is your uncle's men, they'll likely make camp once it gets dark. We can slip past them under cover of night." The hours of waiting were tense. They spoke little, both straining to hear any sound of pursuit. By late afternoon, the distant clatter of hooves confirmed their suspicions riders were indeed following their trail. "Stay here," Henry whispered, easing his rifle from its scabbard. "I'm going to take a look." Lillian nodded, drawing the small revolver from her pocket as Henry crept toward the canyon entrance. Her hands were steady despite her fear, another testament to her father's teaching. She had practiced with Emma until she was confident she could hit what she aimed at least at close range. Henry returned some 15 minutes later, his expression grave. "4 men, one of them is Sila's, your uncle's foreman. They're following our trail all right. Did they see the canyon entrance? Don't think so. They rode past, but they're moving slow, examining the ground. Won't be long before they double back and start looking more carefully." Lillian's mind raced. "What do we do?" Henry considered their options. "There's another way out of this canyon, a steep path that leads up and over the ridge to the north. It's treacherous, especially in the dark, but it might be our only choice." "Then that's what we'll do," Lillian said firmly. They spent the remaining daylight preparing, lightening their packs to ease the burden on the horses, checking cinches and straps, filling canteens from the stream. As dusk gathered, Henry led them to the hidden trail, little more than a game path winding up the rocky slope. "I'll go first," he said, dismounting to lead his horse. "Stay close, but not too close. If my horse slips, I don't want yours going down too." The ascent was nerve-wracking. In the fading light, the path seemed to disappear in places, forcing them to feel their way forward. The horses were nervous but trusting, placing their hooves carefully on the treacherous ground. Loose rocks occasionally skittered down the slope, each sound making Lillian tense, fearing discovery. They were halfway up when a shout echoed from below. Lillian froze, looking back to see torchlight at the canyon entrance. "They've found the canyon," she whispered. "Keep moving," Henry urged. "We've got a head start and they won't risk this trail in full dark." They pushed on, the path growing steeper. Lillian's arms ached from leading her horse and sweat dampened her shirt despite the cool night air. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they crested the ridge. Below them stretched a moonlit valley, the silver ribbon of a river cutting through its center. "We made it," Lillian breathed, relief washing over her. "Not clear yet," Henry cautioned, though he allowed himself a small smile, "but we've bought some time. The river down there will help cover our tracks." They descended more easily, the northern slope less steep and more vegetated. By the time they reached the valley floor, the moon was high overhead, casting enough light to navigate by. They followed the river for several miles before Henry called a halt in a dense copse of cottonwoods. "We need to rest," he said, helping Lillian dismount. Her legs nearly buckled after so many hours of tension and exertion. "Just for a few hours, no fire tonight." They settled in the shelter of the trees, sharing cold jerky and hardtack. The night had turned cold and Lillian shivered despite her coat. "Here," Henry said, noticing her discomfort. He shrugged out of his heavy leather jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "But you'll be cold," she protested. "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her. "Besides, you need it more after that climb." The jacket was warm from his body and carried his scent leather, tobacco, and something uniquely Henry that Lillian couldn't name. She pulled it closer around herself, surprisingly comforted by the simple gesture. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the jacket, for everything?" Henry nodded, his expression difficult to read in the darkness. "Get some sleep, Lillian. I'll take first watch." Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. The knowledge that Uncle Jeremiah's men were so close had rekindled all her fears. What if they were caught? Would Henry be arrested or worse? And what would happen to her? As if sensing her distress, Henry moved closer, settling beside her. "We're going to make it," he said quietly. "I promise you that." "How can you be so sure?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "Because I've never broken a promise yet," he replied simply. "And I don't intend to start now." His certainty was somehow contagious. Lillian found herself believing him. not because his words were particularly convincing, but because of who he was, a man who had already proven his willingness to stand by his convictions, regardless of the cost. "Tell me about your family," she said, wanting to know more about the man who had become her protector and companion. "Besides Caroline, I mean." In the darkness, she heard him shift positions, settling more comfortably against a tree trunk. "Not much to tell. Pa was a hard man, good with horses, bad with people. Ma died when I was 12. Caroline was 4 years older than me. After she died, Pa took to drinking heavy. I left home at 16, been on my own since. No other family, got an uncle in California, haven't seen him in years." There was a pause. "What about you? Any family besides Jeremiah?" Lillian shook her head, then realized he might not see the gesture in the darkness. "No, my mother had a sister in Boston, but we lost touch after she moved there. It's been just me since my parents died." "Must have been lonely," Henry observed. "It was." Lillian drew his jacket tighter around herself. "That's partly why I endured my uncle's control for so long. The thought of being completely alone was frightening." And now the question hung in the air between them, freighted with meaning. Lillian considered her answer carefully. "Now I think I'd rather face loneliness than captivity," she said slowly, "but I'm beginning to believe there might be other options." She couldn't see Henry's expression, but she heard the smile in his voice when he replied, "I believe you're right about that, Lillian Taylor." They talked a while longer, sharing stories of their lives before circumstances had thrown them together. Henry spoke of his years as a drover, the cattle trails he'd ridden, the sights he'd seen across the territories. Lillian told him about growing up on her father's ranch, about her mother's attempts to give her a proper education despite their remote location, about her dreams of someday seeing the ocean. Eventually, Lillian's eyes grew heavy and she drifted off to sleep, lulled by Henry's deep voice and the gentle rushing of the nearby river. For the first time since their journey began, she slept deeply, undisturbed by nightmares of cellars and locked doors. When she awoke, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. Henry was already up, saddling the horses and preparing for another day on the trail. "No sign of pursuit," he reported when he saw she was awake, "but we should keep moving. 3 more days to prospect if we make good time." Lillian rose, stretching muscles stiff from the previous day's exertions. She handed Henry's jacket back with a smile of thanks, then set about helping with the preparations for departure. As they mounted up and continued their journey, Lillian realized something had changed. The constant fear that had been her companion since leaving the ranch had receded, replaced by a cautious optimism. They were still in danger, still being hunted, but somehow, riding beside Henry in the soft light of dawn, the future seemed full of promise rather than peril. The next 2 days passed without incident. They maintained a steady pace, following less traveled routes that Henry knew from his years of riding the territory. The landscape gradually changed as they moved northward, rolling hills giving way to more rugged terrain, scattered pine forests replacing the open prairie. On the afternoon of the 3rd day since their narrow escape, Henry reined in his horse atop a ridge and pointed to the valley below. "There it is. Prospect?" Lillian drew alongside him, gazing down at the settlement nestled in the valley. It was smaller than she had imagined, perhaps 30 buildings arranged along a main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the surrounding countryside. A creek ran along one edge of the town, and wooded hills rose beyond. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "It's growing," Henry said. "Was half this size when I passed through last year." They descended toward the town, both alert for any sign of danger despite their proximity to safety. The sun was low in the west when they rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from the townspeople going about their evening business. Henry led them to a 2-story building with general store painted across its front. A bell jingled as they entered, and a tall, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard looked up from where he was stocking shelves. "Well, I'll be damned," he exclaimed, breaking into a wide grin. "Henry Ross, as I live and breathe." "Lucas," Henry greeted him with a smile, stepping forward to clasp the man's hand. Good to see you, likewise. Didn't expect to see you again so soon. Lucas's gaze shifted to Lillian, standing uncertainly by the door. And who might this be? This is Miss Lillian Taylor, Henry said, a note of pride in his voice. Lillian, meet Lucas Daniels, the best storekeeper and worst poker player west of the Mississippi. Lucas laughed, stepping forward to shake Lillian's hand. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Taylor. Don't believe a word this rascal says about my poker skills. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Daniels, Lillian replied, immediately warming to the man's friendly manner. Lucas turned the store's sign to closed and ushered them toward a back room where a small stove provided warmth. You two look trail-weary. Sit down, I'll brew some coffee. Once they were settled with steaming cups, Henry gave Lucas a condensed version of their situation: Lillian's imprisonment, her escape with his help, and the pursuit by her uncle's men. Lucas whistled low. Sounds like you've had quite the adventure, and not the pleasant kind. He looked at Lillian with genuine concern. I'm sorry for what you've been through, Miss Taylor. Thank you, Lillian said quietly. And please call me Lillian. Well, Lillian, you're safe here, Lucas assured her. Jeremiah Taylor has no reach in Prospect. We're a new town with no established ties to the old power structures. That's what we were hoping, Henry said, relief evident in his voice. Lillian needs somewhere to start fresh. I mentioned you were looking for help in the store. Indeed I am, Lucas confirmed. Business is growing faster than I can manage alone. He turned to Lillian. Can you read and cipher? Yes, sir. My mother was insistent on my education. And you're not afraid of hard work, Lillian straightened her spine. I've never shied away from hard work, Mr. Daniels, Lucas grinned. Then you're hired, assuming you're interested, pays fair, and there's a small room above the store you can use until you find more permanent arrangements. Hope bloomed in Lillian's chest. I'm very interested, thank you. Excellent, Lucas clapped his hands together. Now, you both look exhausted. Let me show you where you can clean up and rest. We can sort out the details tomorrow. Lucas led them to the back stairs and up to the second floor, where a narrow hallway connected several small rooms. Lillian, you can have this one, he said, opening a door to reveal a simple but clean room with a bed, dresser, and washstand. Henry, you can bunk in the room at the end of the hall for tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out more permanent arrangements. Once Lucas had left them, promising to return with food shortly, Henry turned to Lillian. Will this be all right? It's not much, but it's perfect, Lillian interrupted, looking around the small room with wonder. My own space that I can come and go from freely. She turned to Henry, eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you enough. Henry shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. You don't need to thank me, Lillian. I just did what was right. Nevertheless, I am grateful. She stepped closer, suddenly bold, and placed a kiss on his cheek. Thank you for my freedom, Henry Ross. Henry's eyes widened slightly and a flush crept up his neck. Before he could respond, Lucas returned with trays of food and the moment passed. After eating, Lillian excused herself, the exhaustion of their journey finally catching up with her. She fell asleep almost immediately, secure in the knowledge that she was safe, at least for now, in this new town where no one knew her as Jeremiah Taylor's troublesome niece. The next morning, Lillian awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of the town coming to life below. For a moment, she simply lay there, savoring the feeling of waking up in a real bed behind a door that wasn't locked from the outside. After washing and dressing in her cleanest remaining clothes, she made her way downstairs to find Henry and Lucas already at work, unloading crates from a wagon that had just arrived. Morning, Lillian, Lucas called cheerfully. Sleep well. Better than I have in years, she admitted with a smile. What can I do to help? Lucas gave her a quick tour of the store, explaining his system for inventory and accounts. Lillian took to the work naturally, her organized mind quickly grasping the requirements of the job. By midday, she was confidently helping customers, making change and recording sales in Lucas's ledger. You're a natural, Lucas observed as the midday rush subsided. I was worried I might have to train you for weeks, but you've picked it up faster than I could have hoped. Lillian glowed under the praise. Thank you, it feels good to be useful again. As the day progressed, Lillian became aware that Henry had been quiet, working steadily but speaking little. When Lucas stepped out to deliver an order to the blacksmith, she approached him where he was stacking bags of flour. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "You seem distant today," Henry straightened, dusting off his hands. "Just thinking about next steps," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Now that you're settled here, I mean." A chill ran through Lillian as she understood his meaning. "You're leaving?" "I haven't decided yet," he replied, finally looking at her directly. "Lucas mentioned the new ranch outside town is hiring, might be worth looking into." Relief washed over her. "So you're considering staying in Prospect?" "Maybe." There was something guarded in his expression that hadn't been there during their journey. "Depends on a few things." Before Lillian could press further, Lucas returned, and the moment for private conversation passed. Throughout the rest of the day, she found herself watching Henry, trying to decipher the change in his demeanor. He had been so open on the trail, especially during those quiet evenings by the campfire. Now, it was as if he had withdrawn behind a wall of polite distance. That evening, after the store closed, Lucas invited them to join him for dinner at the town's only restaurant, a small establishment called the Silver Spoon that served surprisingly good food for such a remote location. The owner, a widow named Martha Jenkins, greeted Lucas like an old friend and eyed Henry and Lillian with undisguised curiosity. "New folks in town are always welcome," she said, leading them to a table. "Especially pretty young ladies. We're short on those in Prospect." Lillian blushed at the forthright assessment. "Thank you for the welcome, Mrs. Jenkins." "Martha, please," the woman insisted. "And who might you be?" Lucas made the introductions, explaining that Lillian would be working at his store. He made no mention of her circumstances or the danger that had brought them to Prospect, for which Lillian was grateful. "And you, Mr. Ross?" Martha asked, turning her attention to Henry. "Just passing through or planning to stay a while?" "Haven't quite decided yet," Henry replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Martha nodded sagely. "Well, Prospect has a way of growing on folks. I came for a month to help my sister after her husband died, and that was 3 years ago." The meal was pleasant, with Lucas keeping the conversation flowing by sharing town gossip and introducing them to various residents who stopped by their table. Lillian learned that Prospect had been founded just 5 years earlier, when silver was discovered in the nearby hills. The initial boom had subsided when the silver proved less plentiful than hoped, but the town had survived by becoming a supply point for the surrounding ranches and farms. "We're building something here," Lucas explained, echoing what Henry had told her on the trail. "A community that takes care of its own." By the time they returned to the store, Lillian felt cautiously optimistic about her new home. The people had been welcoming, the work seemed agreeable, and for the first time in years she felt the stirrings of independence. As they climbed the stairs to their respective rooms, she finally found a moment alone with Henry. "Walk with me tomorrow?" she asked impulsively. "Lucas mentioned I should have Sunday mornings off. I'd like to explore the town a bit." Henry hesitated, then nodded. "All right, after breakfast." "Good night, Henry," she said softly, lingering at her door. "Good night, Lillian." For a moment, the wall between them seemed to thin, and she caught a glimpse of the man who had sat with her by countless campfires, sharing stories and dreams. Then he turned and continued down the hall to his room, leaving her to wonder what had changed since their arrival in Prospect. Sunday dawned clear and mild. Lillian dressed in her best remaining dress, a simple blue calico that had seen better days but was at least clean and mended. She made a mental note to use her first wages to purchase fabric for new clothing. Henry was waiting for her downstairs, hat in hand, looking more rested than he had in days. He'd clearly taken advantage of the town's bathhouse, his hair still damp and his face freshly shaved. "You look nice," he said, a hint of his former warmth returning. "Thank you," Lillian replied, pleased by the compliment. "So do you. Civilization agrees with you." They walked through the town, Henry pointing out various buildings and businesses as they went. Prospect was small, but growing. A church was under construction at one end of the main street, and several new houses were being built on the outskirts. Lucas says they're expecting the railroad to build a spur line here within 2 years, Henry mentioned as they passed the telegraph office. That'll change things considerably. For the better, Lillian asked. Depends who you ask. It'll bring more people, more business. Some folks welcome that, others worry it'll change the character of the place. They continued their walk, eventually finding themselves at the edge of town near the creek. A small bridge crossed the water, leading to a path that wound through meadows dotted with late wildflowers. "Shall we?" Henry gestured to the bridge. They crossed and followed the path, eventually coming to a fallen log that provided a natural bench overlooking a bend in the creek. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the water flow past. Finally, Lillian gathered her courage to ask the question that had been bothering her since their arrival. "Henry, have I done something to offend you? You've seemed different since we reached Prospect." Henry looked surprised, then guilty. "No, Lillian, you've done nothing wrong." "Then why the distance? On the trail, we talked so easily. Now it feels like you're pulling away." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not you, it's the situation. I don't understand." Henry was quiet for a long moment, struggling to find the right words. "On the trail, things were different. We had a clear purpose, a shared danger. Now we're here and you're starting a new life, a proper life. I just thought, maybe it was best if I stepped back." "Why would that be best?" Lillian pressed, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "Because of who I am, Lillian." His voice held a note of frustration. "A drifter with no prospects, no property, nothing to offer someone like you." Understanding dawned, bringing with it a wave of emotion. "You think I care about that? You should," he said firmly. "You deserve better than a saddled tramp with nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back." "Henry Ross," Lillian said, suddenly angry, "I have spent the last 5 years of my life having men tell me what I deserve and what's best for me. I won't accept it from you too." Her vehemence startled him. "That's not what isn't it?" she interrupted. "You've decided what's best for me without even asking what I want." She stood up, too agitated to remain seated. "Do you know what I want, Henry? I want the chance to make my own choices. And I choose to have you in my life, not pushing me away for my own good." Henry rose as well, his expression a mixture of confusion and hope. "Lillian, I never meant to." "I know you didn't," she said more gently, her initial anger fading. "You're a good man, Henry, the best I've ever known. But please don't make decisions for me. I've had enough of that to last a lifetime." He nodded slowly, taking in her words. "You're right, I'm sorry." "Does that mean you'll stay in Prospect? I mean, if you want me to," he said simply. "I do." Lillian took a deep breath, summoning her courage. "Very much." Something shifted in Henry's expression, the wall that had been between them crumbling away. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lillian Taylor, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Lillian felt a surge of joy unlike anything she had ever experienced. This was what freedom felt like, she realized. The freedom to choose, to love, to build a life on her own terms. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I found you in that cellar," he admitted. Lillian smiled, her heart full. "I'm glad you finally did." They returned to town hand in hand, both aware that this was just the beginning of whatever lay between them. There were still challenges ahead: Jeremiah's pursuit, the difficulty of building new lives in a frontier town, the ghosts of their respective pasts. But for the first time, Lillian faced the future without fear. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Lillian worked at the store, quickly becoming indispensable to Lucas with her organizational skills and friendly manner with customers. Henry found work at the Circle M Ranch outside town, his experience with cattle and horses making him a valuable addition to the outfit. They saw each other in the evenings and on Sundays, gradually learning the everyday details about each other that their journey hadn't revealed: Henry's preference for coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, Lillian's habit of humming while she worked, his unexpected skill at whittling, her love of thunderstorms. Word came from Emma via the telegraph that Jeremiah was still searching for them but had extended his hunt south, convinced they were headed for Texas. The news brought relief, but also a reminder that danger hadn't passed entirely. One Sunday afternoon, about a month after their arrival in Prospect, Henry and Lillian rode out to a spot he had discovered during his work at the ranch, a small plateau overlooking the valley, with a view of the entire settlement and the mountains beyond. "It's breathtaking," Lillian said as they dismounted. "The autumn colors were at their peak, painting the landscape in golds and reds. I thought you'd like it." Henry spread a blanket on a patch of grass, and they settled side by side, sharing the lunch Martha had packed for them. As they ate, Henry seemed preoccupied, unusually quiet even for him. Lillian was about to ask what was troubling him when he finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice serious, "about the future, about what I want." "And what do you want, Henry?" Lillian asked softly. "A home," he said simply, "somewhere to belong, someone to build a life with." He turned to face her fully. "I've never wanted those things before, never thought they were for me, but now, Henry took her hands in his. "Now I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it, Lillian Taylor." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as she understood what he was saying. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I am." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple ring with a modest stone that caught the sunlight. "This was my mother's. I've carried it all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to use it." Lillian's breath caught as Henry continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I don't have much to offer yet, but I've been saving, and Lucas mentioned there's a piece of land for sale on the edge of town. It's small, but there's room for a house and maybe a garden. I thought that is, if you wanted, we could make it our home." "Henry," Lillian whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "Lillian Taylor, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in Prospect?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, her heart overflowing. "Yes, Henry Ross, I will marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Henry's kiss was gentle, reverent, filled with promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. "I never thought I'd find this," Lillian admitted. "After everything with my uncle, I was afraid to trust anyone again. But you showed me that some men are worth trusting. And you showed me that some things are worth fighting for," Henry replied, drawing her close. "When I broke that lock and said no more, I had no idea I was really saying yes to a whole new life." They stayed on the plateau until the sun began to set, talking about their dreams for the future, the home they would build, the life they would share. As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Lillian felt a sense of completion, of rightness. The news of their engagement was met with enthusiasm in Prospect. Martha insisted on hosting a small celebration at the Silver Spoon, and Lucas offered to order a proper wedding dress for Lillian through his suppliers in Denver. "Consider it an early wedding present," he said when she protested the expense. "You've doubled my business since you started working here. It's the least I can do." The wedding was set for the first Sunday in December, to be held in the newly completed church. As the day approached, Lillian found herself almost overwhelmed by the kindness of the townspeople, many of whom contributed something to the celebration: flowers from Martha's greenhouse, a wedding cake baked by the wife of the blacksmith, music provided by a miner who played the fiddle with unexpected skill. 2 days before the wedding, a telegram arrived that cast a shadow over their happiness. Emma's message was brief but alarming. "Jeremiah knows where you are, coming north with men, be careful." Henry read the message with a grim expression. "I should have known he wouldn't give up so easily." "What do we do?" Lillian asked, fear tightening her chest. "Run again?" "No," Henry said firmly. "We're done running. This is our home now. Besides, this time we're not alone." He was right. When Lucas called a town meeting that evening to explain the situation, the response was immediate and resolute. "Nobody comes into Prospect and threatens our people," declared the blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Josiah. "That's right," Martha agreed. "Lillian's one of us now." The sheriff, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Blackburn, who had earned her badge by single-handedly capturing a notorious gang of cattle rustlers, was particularly determined. I'll post deputies at all approaches to town, she decided. First sign of trouble, we'll be ready. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of snow on the ground that transformed Prospect into something from a fairy tale. Despite the threat hanging over them, Lillian refused to postpone the ceremony. I won't let him control my life anymore, she told Henry as they met briefly before the wedding, not even from a distance. The church was filled to capacity, the entire town turning out to witness the union of the store clerk and the cowboy who had arrived so dramatically in their midst just months before. Lillian wore the dress Lucas had ordered, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that made her feel like a princess. Henry, looking somewhat uncomfortable in a new suit, waited for her at the altar, his face lighting up as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the young minister eloquently speaking of love, commitment, and the courage to build a life together against all odds. When Henry and Lillian exchanged vows, their voices were clear and certain, their eyes never leaving each other's. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. As Henry kissed his bride, a cheer went up from the assembled townspeople. Lillian felt a surge of joy so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. Despite everything, the years of captivity, the dangerous escape, the continuing threat, she had found happiness beyond anything she could have imagined. The celebration moved to the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food and drink contributed by everyone in Prospect. Music filled the air as the fiddler and a few other musicians played lively tunes, and dancing soon commenced. Lillian and Henry had just finished their first dance as husband and wife when a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. Sheriff Blackburn entered, her expression serious. Riders approaching from the south, she announced, 6 men moving fast. A hush fell over the gathering. Henry moved protectively to Lillian's side, one arm around her waist. It's him, isn't it? Lillian asked quietly. The sheriff nodded. Matches the description you gave us. A man with a splinted leg, riding in a wagon with 5 armed men accompanying him. What do you suggest, Sheriff? Henry asked, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. Sheriff Blackburn's lips curved in a small, determined smile. I suggest we give them a proper Prospect welcome. The plan came together quickly. Most of the women and children remained in the town hall, while the men and several capable women, including Martha with her husband's shotgun, took up positions throughout the town. Henry insisted on being part of the greeting party despite Lillian's concern. This ends today, he told her, cupping her face gently, one way or another. Be careful, she whispered, kissing him fiercely. I've only just found you, I'm not ready to lose you. You won't, he promised. Wait here with the others. But Lillian shook her head. No, I'm done hiding from him, I'll stand with you. Her determination left no room for argument. Together, they joined Sheriff Blackburn and a dozen armed townspeople in the middle of the main street, facing south toward the approaching riders. They didn't have to wait long. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and then the riders appeared, 5 hard-looking men flanking a wagon driven by Jeremiah Taylor. Despite the splint on his leg, he sat tall, his face set in lines of rage and determination. The group pulled to a halt when they saw the welcoming committee. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed as he spotted Lillian and Henry. There you are, you ungrateful girl, he called, his voice carrying across the distance between them. Do you know what you've put me through? The expense, the humiliation. That's close enough, Sheriff Blackburn announced, stepping forward. State your business in Prospect. Jeremiah looked at her with contempt. My business is with my niece and the man who kidnapped her. This doesn't concern you or your town. That's where you're wrong, the sheriff replied calmly. These people are citizens of Prospect now. Anything concerning them concerns us. The girl is mentally unstable, Jeremiah insisted, playing the card that had worked so well in his own territory. And this man, he pointed at Henry, took advantage of her condition to abduct her. There's a warrant for his arrest. Not in this jurisdiction, Sheriff Blackburn said, and Miss Taylor, Mrs. Ross, now seems perfectly sound of mind to me. Jeremiah's face darkened at the word Mrs. What nonsense is this? Lillian stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. It's true, Uncle. Henry and I were married today, legally, properly, in front of witnesses. You can't do that. You have no right to make such decisions without my consent. She has every right, Henry said, moving to stand beside his wife. Lillian is a grown woman, not a piece of property. Jeremiah sputtered with rage, turning to his men. Take them, both of them. But as the men reached for their weapons, they found themselves looking down the barrels of more than a dozen guns. From rooftops, doorways, and windows, the people of Prospect made their presence known. I wouldn't, Sheriff Blackburn advised mildly. You're outnumbered and outgunned. For a tense moment, it seemed Jeremiah might order his men to fight anyway. Then, slowly, reality dawned on his face. He was beaten, and he knew it. This isn't over, he spat, glaring at Lillian and Henry. That girl is still my blood, and he's still a kidnapper. Actually, it is over, came a new voice. Everyone turned to see Lucas approaching, a document in his hand. I took the liberty of contacting the territorial governor about your situation, he said to Lillian. Explained the circumstances, provided witness statements about your uncle's treatment of you. The governor was quite interested, especially when I mentioned that Jeremiah Taylor has been using his influence to avoid paying territorial taxes. He handed the document to Sheriff Blackburn, who read it quickly, a smile spreading across her face. Well, it seems the governor has issued a restraining order against you, Mr. Taylor. You're to stay at least 50 miles away from your niece at all times. She looked up, her expression stern. And there's a note here about an investigation into your financial dealings to begin immediately. Jeremiah's face went from red to white. This is outrageous. I'll fight this. You're welcome to try, the sheriff said. But for now, I suggest you and your men turn around and head back the way you came. Unless you'd prefer to spend the night in my jail for disturbing the peace. Defeat evident in every line of his body, Jeremiah glared at Lillian one last time. You'll regret this, he warned. When the money runs out, when life gets hard, you'll wish you'd listened to me. Lillian shook her head, pity replacing her fear. No, Uncle, I've known hardship, I've known cruelty. What I've never known until now is happiness. I'll take my chances with that. Without another word, Jeremiah signaled to his men, and they turned their horses. The wagon creaked as it began its journey back the way it had come, Jeremiah's rigid back conveying his fury more clearly than words. As they disappeared from view, a cheer went up from the townspeople. Sheriff Blackburn holstered her pistol with a satisfied nod. Well, that's that. Now I believe we were in the middle of a wedding celebration. The relief was overwhelming. Lillian turned to Henry, who gathered her in his arms, holding her tightly as if he never intended to let go. It's really over, she whispered against his chest. It is, he agreed, pulling back to look into her eyes. And our life together is just beginning. The celebration resumed with even greater enthusiasm, lasting well into the night. When Henry and Lillian finally departed for the small cabin Lucas had loaned them for their wedding night, they were showered with flower petals and good wishes from everyone in town. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the despair of the cellar to the joy of finding love and community, it seemed almost unbelievable. What are you thinking about? Henry asked, stroking her hair as she rested her head on his chest. About how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't broken that lock and said no more, she replied softly. How one moment of courage changed everything. For both of us, he agreed. I was just drifting before I met you, Lillian. No purpose, no home. You gave me something to fight for, something to build. She raised herself on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. I love you, Henry Ross. And I love you, Lillian Ross, he replied, pulling her down for a tender kiss. More than I ever thought possible. In that moment, the past with all its darkness seemed very far away. Ahead lay a future. They would build together the house on the edge of town, children perhaps, a life of freedom and purpose in a community that had embraced them as their own. The journey had been dangerous, the wounds deep, but in the end, Love had proven stronger than the locks that had once confined her. And in Henry's arms, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she was, at last, truly free. Epilogue. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the curtains of the Ross family home, a sturdy 2-story house on the edge of Prospect. Lillian stood at the kitchen window, watching Henry in the garden, teaching their 3-year-old son William how to plant bean seeds. Nearby, baby Caroline slept in a basket under the shade of an apple tree that had been their first planting after the house was built. The town had grown in the 5 years since their arrival. The railroad spur had been completed the previous year, bringing new businesses and settlers. Lucas had expanded the store, with Lillian now managing a thriving section devoted to fabrics, ready-made clothing, and household goods. Henry had used his savings and experience to start a small horse breeding operation, focusing on sturdy mounts well-suited to the mountain terrain. Uncle Jeremiah had never returned to Prospect. They had heard through Emma that the investigation into his finances had resulted in substantial fines and the loss of much of his political influence. Last year, word came that he had sold his ranch and moved east, his health failing after a second riding accident. The news had brought Lillian no joy, but no sorrow either, just a sense of a chapter finally closed. She had long since stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped fearing that her hard-won freedom might be snatched away. A squeal of delight from the garden drew her attention back to the present. William had discovered a worm in the soil and was showing it proudly to his father. Henry's face was alight with love and patience as he explained to his son why worms were good for the garden. Lillian felt her heart swell at the sight. This was what freedom had brought her, not just escape from confinement, but the chance to build something beautiful, something lasting. The front door opened, and Emma Winters entered, carrying a basket of preserves. The older woman had sold her way station 2 years earlier and moved to Prospect to be closer to what she called her adopted family. "Those garden plots are looking fine," Emma observed, setting her basket on the table. "Henry's got a real knack for growing things." "He does," Lillian agreed fondly, "though he claims it's all William's doing." Emma chuckled. "That boy's going to be just like his father, kind-hearted and too modest for his own good." They watched through the window as Henry scooped up his son, settling him on broad shoulders for a ride back to the house. Caroline stirred in her basket, and Henry paused to tuck her blanket more securely around her tiny form. "You've built a good life here," Emma said quietly. "We have," Lillian agreed, grateful beyond words for the path that had led her to this moment. "Better than I ever dared to dream." When Henry entered with William still perched on his shoulders and Caroline cradled in one arm, his smile at the sight of Lillian was as warm and genuine as the day he had first helped her from the cellar into the sunlight. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. "Welcome home," Lillian said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. And in her heart, she whispered a silent thanks for broken locks and the courage to say no more, the first steps on the journey that had led her to true freedom and lasting love.